Edrin Hale sat in the small room, the cold wind howling against the thin metal walls of his outpost. The snow outside lay thick on the ground, turning the horizon into a white blur. He wrapped his old blanket tighter around his shoulders and stared at the little heater sputtering in the corner. New Year's Eve. In most places people would celebrate, laugh and toast to the future. Here, on this frozen frontier, it was just another quiet day. Or so he thought. He was an old war medic now, long retired from the field. 4 years he had run across battlefields, patching up soldiers and civilians alike. He had seen explosions, fires and death. He had carried soldiers from burning ships, fought against disease, and worked under conditions that would break most people. But now the war was over. The galaxy had moved on. And he, Edrin Hale, had moved nowhere. He had come here, far from cities and colonies, seeking peace. A quiet end to a loud life. He took a slow sip of the tea he had made, feeling it barely warm his hands. Outside, the wind rattled the walls and the door, as if reminding him that he was very much alone. He glanced at the small calendar on the wall. The last day of the year. A time of reflection. He thought of old friends, many gone, many scattered across the stars. A few would send messages maybe, but he knew it would not be the same. For a man who had spent decades saving lives, the silence now felt heavy. A flicker of light from the door caught his attention. He frowned. The door had been locked. The wind could not have caused it. And then he heard it, a soft knock, barely louder than a whisper. His heart thumped in surprise. No one came here in winter. The colony nearby had collapsed years ago. The outpost was supposed to be empty. "Who is there?" he called, his voice calm but cautious. The knock came again, slower this time, almost pleading. Edrin hesitated. His old instincts from the war told him to stay back, to prepare for anything. But there was something about the sound, small, weak and frightened. He slowly approached the door, gripping the edge of his coat. The snow made a cold crunch under his boots. He opened the door carefully, expecting maybe a lost traveler, someone seeking shelter. Instead he found something that made him freeze. A massive figure stood before him, larger than any human he had ever seen. Its scales shimmered faintly under the weak lights of the outpost. Eyes, large and deep, looked at him not with anger but with fear and desperation. It was a dragon, a real dragon, but not one of the stories told in holosagas. This one was alive, breathing shallowly and trembling. And in its claw, wrapped in torn cloth, was a small hatchling. The baby dragon's scales were pale, its tiny wings drooping, and its chest heaving as if each breath was a battle. Edrin's first thought was disbelief. Dragons were thought to be distant creatures, rarely seen and feared across human colonies. To have one here on his small outpost in the middle of nowhere was impossible. And yet there it was. And it was not attacking. It did not roar or snap. The dragon simply lowered its massive head toward him, bowing in a way that seemed almost respectful. The hatchling made a small whimper and Edrin's heart tightened. He had seen dying soldiers, dying children, dying creatures of every kind, but never a dragon. And now this mother had brought her child to him. She had crossed space, cold, snow and danger for this one small hope. All right, he murmured, moving aside. "Come in." Vaelthra, the mother dragon, hesitated only for a moment before carefully stepping inside. The room was small, barely enough for her size, but she crouched, careful not to crush anything. Edrin guided her toward the floor, laying down a thick blanket for the hatchling. The baby made a small noise, a mix between a whine and a cough, and Edrin felt the familiar pull of urgency. He knelt beside the hatchling, feeling its tiny body shiver against his hands. Its breathing was shallow, uneven. He could see the faint heat rising in little puffs, a warning of fever. Memories of the war flooded back. The first time he had held a dying child in his arms, the desperation of a parent watching helplessly. Only this time the parent was not human. Vaelthra lowered her head to watch him, her eyes shining with unspoken trust. Edrin studied her carefully. There was pain in her gaze, fear and exhaustion, but also hope. She had chosen him. Somehow she had known that he could help. I don't know dragon medicine," he whispered. "But I can try." The dragon's eyes blinked slowly, almost as if she understood. She stayed silent, her body tense but patient. She let him examine the hatchling, let him touch it, let him begin. And in that moment, Edrin realized something. Life in any form was precious. No matter the species, no matter the history of fear or war, saving a life was always worth trying. He moved quickly but carefully, checking the hatchling's pulse, warming its tiny body, speaking softly to calm both mother and child. Outside, the wind continued to howl, but inside, the small outpost felt warmer, safer. Hope, fragile and new, had entered through the door on the coldest night of the year. The hours passed slowly. Edrin worked with quiet concentration, guided by instinct and experience. He did not rest. Vailthra stayed near, her massive head occasionally nuzzling the hatchling, watching every move he made. The hatchling's breathing, though still weak, began to even out slightly. Edrin allowed himself a small sigh of relief. By the time the first stars began to fade with the approach of dawn, Edrin knew the new year would be different than he had expected. It would not be silent. It would not be lonely. A dragon mother had knocked on his door, carrying her dying hatchling, and in doing so, she had changed the course of his quiet life. For the first time in many years, Edrin Hale felt the stirrings of purpose again. And he understood something deep and simple. Sometimes life's most unexpected guests could bring the greatest hope. Edrin carefully closed the door behind them, the cold wind now trapped outside. The small clinic smelled faintly of antiseptic and old metal, a smell he was used to from decades of treating humans. But this was different. A dragon and her tiny hatchling were inside, and he could feel the weight of the moment pressing on him. For centuries, dragons had been feared and respected. Humans rarely got close to them, and most legends said dragons were proud, sometimes dangerous and never patient with outsiders. Yet, Vailthra had come to him not to attack but for help. Edrin knelt beside the hatchling, who shivered weakly on the blanket. Its scales glimmered faintly in the dim light, but the glow was uneven, a sign of something very wrong. The hatchling's small chest rose and fell in quick, shallow breaths. Its tiny wings twitched occasionally, and it let out a small, pitiful cry. Edrin's heart tightened. He had seen many patients die, but the helplessness in this tiny dragon was unlike anything he had faced before. He glanced at Vailthra, who lowered her massive head to watch him, her eyes filled with worry. She nudged the hatchling gently, as if urging it to breathe, and whispered in a soft, melodic language that Edrin could not understand. He assumed it was a language of comfort, a lullaby meant for her child. The dragon mother did not threaten him. She simply waited, tense but trusting. "All right," Edrin murmured, "let's see what we can do." He reached for his old medical kit. It was modest, but it had everything he might need. Syringes, thermal blankets, basic medications, and a few scanning tools. He carefully checked Kirix's tiny body, feeling for heat, pulse, and any sign of internal injury. The hatchling's body burned hotter than anything he had treated in humans. It was an unstable fever, one that rose and fell unpredictably. Vailthra's eyes widened slightly as he worked. "No dragon healer has been able to stop this," she said quietly, her voice trembling with exhaustion. "It is not from magic or disease alone. This sickness comes from your kind." Edrin froze. "My kind?" he asked carefully. "It is human-made," she continued. "Long ago in battles your soldiers fought, radiation, toxins, weapons of fire and metal, it spread across the land. Some did not survive, some healed. But this hatchling was born in a place touched by that energy. Dragon medicine cannot cleanse it." The words hit Edrin like a sudden frost. He had been a field medic, a healer of soldiers exposed to countless weapons, radiation, and chemicals. He had treated burns, sickness, and wounds caused by human weapons. Could it be that the same weapons he had helped his soldiers survive were now harming this innocent creature? His stomach twisted with guilt. He lowered his head, thinking of all the times he had administered treatments, patched up soldiers, and moved through battlefields without fully knowing the long-term damage left behind. Could his own hands have indirectly caused this? The thought made him feel old, weary, and responsible. But he shook it off. There was no time for self-pity, no space for regret. The hatchling needed action, not sorrow. "Vailthra," he said softly, "I don't know dragon medicine, but I do know life. I can try." The dragon's eyes met his. She blinked slowly as if weighing his words. Then, with a quiet rumble of trust, she stepped back slightly, giving him space. She had no choice but to allow a human to help. And in that moment, Edrin felt a strange clarity. It did not matter whose species caused the problem. What mattered now was saving the life in front of him. He carefully set up a thermal blanket around Kirix and adjusted the small portable heater. The hatchling's body trembled violently in the cold room. Edrin placed his hands on the tiny dragon, speaking in low, calm tones, hoping to steady its heartbeat. He could see the heat pulsing through the scales, and he began calculating how to reduce the fever without harming the hatchling. Vailthra hovered close, watching every movement. "Be gentle," she said. "Too much force and it could be fatal." "I understand," Edrin replied. He worked with steady hands, adjusting the hatchling's posture, wrapping warm packs carefully, and monitoring every breath. His mind raced through everything he knew about fevers, toxins, and blood flow. He treated this dragon as he had treated human soldiers, with patience, observation, and steady care. Hours passed in tense silence, broken only by the occasional whimper of Kirix. Edrin grew tired, but he could not stop. The hatchling's life hung by the thinnest thread, and each second counted. He used gentle cooling techniques, monitored heartbeats with old sensors, and whispered words of reassurance to the tiny creature, even though it could not understand human speech. Vaelthra remained near, her massive head lowering to hover over her hatchling. She tried to nuzzle it, but she did not interfere with Edrin's careful treatment. She seemed to recognize that this human's hands, worn and scarred from decades of war, might now save a life that dragon medicine alone could not. By late night, the hatchling's fever began to stabilize. Its breaths became slower, more even. Edrin allowed himself a small smile, though he did not speak too loudly. Vaelthra's eyes glimmered with relief, and she let out a low, soft rumble that sounded almost like gratitude. Edrin had not used magic, dragon medicine, or technology beyond what humans had created decades ago. He had simply acted. He had chosen life over fear, care over regret. Sitting back against the wall, he let himself breathe for the first time in hours. He glanced at the dragon mother and hatchling, realizing how fragile trust could be. A creature far larger, far more powerful than him had come to his door. She had entrusted her child to him, knowing he could fail, knowing he might make mistakes. And yet here they were, both alive, both breathing, both watching him with hope. The first snow of the evening had stopped, leaving the horizon bright under the dim starlight. Edrin felt a strange warmth despite the cold of the frontier. The war had ended, yes, but life still demanded courage in unexpected ways. Saving this hatchling, helping this dragon mother, reminded him that a healer's work never truly ends. Even after battles and bloodshed, life always finds a way to ask for care. He looked at Vaelthra once more. She nodded slightly as if to say, "You are worthy." Edrin nodded back, a small smile breaking through his fatigue. He could not erase the past, but he could act in the present. And for Kirix, that action might mean everything. Outside, the stars shone quietly, the galaxy unaware of the small miracle unfolding in a frozen outpost. But inside, in the warmth of the little clinic, human and dragon shared a single hope: that life, no matter how fragile or strange, could still survive. Edrin Hale sat in the dim light of his small clinic, staring at the tiny hatchling. Kirix's shallow breaths rose and fell in uneven waves. He had stabilized the fever earlier, but the real work was just beginning. He pulled out his worn medical tools, ones designed for humans long ago, and studied them carefully. These were simple, outdated tools by modern standards, but in his hands they could still save life. Vaelthra crouched nearby, her enormous wings folding around her body. She watched every movement, her eyes wide with fear. In dragon culture, humans were unpredictable. They healed differently, sometimes dangerously, and their methods were strange. Now, her hatchling lay in the hands of a human, and she felt helpless, unsure whether to trust him. Edrin took a deep breath. "All right, Kirix," he whispered softly. "Let's try this." He set up a small cooling chamber using an insulated box, old heaters, and frozen packs he had prepared for emergencies. Dragons did not need cooling chambers in the same way humans did, but this sickness was not normal. This was radiation poisoning left over from battles on the frontier long ago. No dragon healer had known how to treat it. The chamber was gentle, designed to reduce fever slowly without shock. Vaelthra's eyes flicked between him and her hatchling. She had seen humans operate medical tools before, field medics, doctors, but never like this. She had expected sharp instruments, painful injections, or sudden, dangerous movements. Instead, Edrin worked quietly, steadily, with patience. Each movement was precise, each touch careful. The dragon mother relaxed slightly, though she remained tense. Next, Edrin prepared a basic blood filtration system. Using a few tubes, a small hand pump, and his knowledge of blood flow, he could slowly filter toxins from Kirix's blood. He knew the hatchling's body was fragile. A wrong move could kill it instantly. But he also knew that doing nothing was worse. Carefully, he attached the tubes, monitoring the flow, adjusting pressure, and watching the hatchling's chest for any signs of strain. Vaelthra let out a quiet rumble, a sound of worry and protest. She had never seen a human do anything like this. The process seemed unnatural, even frightening, yet she noticed something important. Kirix was not screaming in pain. He was breathing more steadily, small flecks of color returning to his scales. The humans' methods were strange, yes, but they worked. Hours passed. Edrin whispered quietly, counting breaths, monitoring temperature, adjusting blankets, and coaxing the hatchling to stay calm. His hands moved almost automatically, guided by decades of experience. He treated Kirix as he once treated young soldiers on the battlefield, fragile bodies, terrified eyes, and the desperate need for calm. He remembered a boy named Laren from a war long ago. Laren had broken both legs in an explosion and was terrified, crying out for his mother. Edrin had stayed by his side, whispering instructions, monitoring his breathing, and guiding him through pain without unnecessary force. Now, Kirix was Laren in dragon form, tiny, fragile, and trembling under the weight of sickness. Vaelthra continued to hover, her massive head leaning close to the hatchling. She nudged him gently with her snout when he shivered, and Edrin allowed it. He realized that the dragon mother's presence mattered just as much as his medical skills. Kirix seemed to sense her comfort. Together, the human and mother dragon formed a silent team, one providing care, the other providing reassurance. The night deepened. Outside, the stars glittered coldly over the frozen colony. Edrin did not notice the passage of time. Minutes blurred into hours. He worked tirelessly, adjusting the cooling chamber, gently massaging Kirix's chest to help his lungs expand, monitoring blood flow and whispering encouragement. "You're strong, little one," he murmured. "Just breathe. Just stay with me." Slowly, the hatchling's tiny body began to respond. Its chest rose and fell in steadier rhythms. Its trembling decreased. The glow of life returned to its scales, faint but noticeable. Vaelthra let out a low hum, a sound of relief that reverberated softly through the room. Edrin did not stop, though. The sickness had weakened Kirix's body deeply. Recovery would take hours, maybe days. But for now, the danger of death had passed. Every second he spent with careful hands and watchful eyes increased the hatchling's chance of survival. At one point, Edrin leaned back against the wall for a moment, rubbing his tired eyes. He looked at Vaelthra and offered a small, tired smile. "He's going to make it," he said softly. "He's strong. He's a fighter." The dragon mother's eyes glistened with emotion. She dipped her head low in a gesture that humans would call gratitude. She had brought her child to many places, hoping for help, but she had never seen anyone care like this. Her trust in humans, once cautious and wary, grew just a little stronger that night. The stars outside began to shift as the new year approached. Time passed quietly, but for Edrin, it felt like a small miracle. In a tiny clinic on a frozen frontier, a human medic and a dragon mother had fought a battle not with weapons, but with patience, skill, and care. It was quiet, almost invisible to the galaxy, but it was no less important than any war he had ever fought. Edrin paused for a moment and looked at the hatchling. Kirix's breathing was slow, steady, and regular. The tiny wings twitched, not in pain but in response to warmth and security. The little dragon's life had turned a corner, all because a human refused to give up. Vaelthra watched him, her massive head resting near her hatchling. She seemed to understand in her own way that humans could be unpredictable, but they could also be brave in ways dragons sometimes could not. They could choose to fight for life even when the odds seemed impossible. The cold wind outside continued to swirl, and the stars above sparkled with the silent passage of time. Edrin allowed himself a quiet moment to feel hope again. The war had ended, yes, but life had not. And sometimes, life demanded a different kind of courage. Quiet, careful, tireless, and full of love for those who could not fight for themselves. When the first faint light of dawn touched the horizon, Edrin looked at Kirix and smiled. The hatchling was weak but alive. The dragon mother lowered her head to him, a silent acknowledgement of trust, respect, and hope. The new year had arrived, and with it, a reminder that even in the darkest places, life could survive, and sometimes it could thrive, with the hands of those willing to care. Edrin sat back, exhausted but filled with a deep sense of purpose. Outside, the stars shifted into the new year, shining cold and distant. Inside, in a small clinic on a frozen frontier, life had won another small, quiet battle. The small outpost clinic had grown quiet after the long night, but the news of what had happened there began to travel in ways that Edrin could not imagine. In the distant corners of dragon space, whispers moved faster than ships. Word spread quietly. A human had saved a hatchling without weapons, without magic, using only his hands, his mind, and his determination. The story surprised many dragons. Some were skeptical, some curious, and some could hardly believe it. Humans, they had thought, were reckless, fragile, and dangerous. They fought wars carelessly, built machines that could destroy worlds, and rarely showed true patience. Vaelthra, sitting beside her recovering hatchling, thought about those old beliefs. Dragons had watched humans for centuries. They had seen humans explode into war, burn cities, and destroy ecosystems without mercy. They had judged humans as destroyers, chaotic and selfish. She had even believed it herself, carrying the weight of suspicion in her heart. But now, after seeing Edrin, she felt something shift. Edrin was tired, sitting back against the wall with his eyes half closed. He did not look heroic. He did not roar, fight, or command attention. He simply sat beside Kirix, monitoring the hatchling's breathing, adjusting blankets, and whispering soft encouragement. Every action was quiet, almost ordinary, but each action held life itself. Vaelthra watched him with careful eyes. She noticed the precision, the patience, the unwillingness to leave Kirix alone even when exhaustion would have justified it. She realized that humans survived in a way dragons often overlooked. Strength, speed, and power mattered, yes. But humans endured not because they were the strongest. They endured because they refused to abandon the wounded. They endured because even when fear or pain overwhelmed them, they chose to act, to help, to protect. It was a strength that dragons rarely appreciated, hidden beneath human frailty, masked by their apparent recklessness. Vaelthra shifted closer to Kirix, brushing a claw lightly against the hatchling's soft scales. The little dragon stirred, letting out a soft, tiny whine. His eyes fluttered weakly. Edrin leaned forward instinctively, placing a gentle hand near the hatchling's head. "It's okay, little one," he murmured. "You're safe now." For a long moment nothing happened. Then, slowly, Kirix's eyes began to open. They were bright, luminous, and filled with wonder. His gaze wandered, first meeting the human, then his mother. The hatchling twitched his tiny wings, attempting to stretch them, though weakness still held him back. He was alive. He had survived. Vaelthra's massive head lowered toward Edrin. She had never done this before. In dragon culture, such a gesture, bowing the head to another being, was sacred. It was a sign of respect, trust, and gratitude, reserved for moments that transcended fear, pride, or hierarchy. She had seen warriors bow to one another in the heat of battle, yes. She had seen dragons bow to those stronger than themselves. But she had never bowed to a human. Never. Until now. The gesture startled Edrin. He had expected gratitude from the hatchling or cautious acknowledgement from Vaelthra, but not this. He felt a strange warmth in his chest. Here was a creature far larger, far more powerful than he was, lowering itself in respect and trust. He had not used weapons or magic. He had not demanded anything. He had acted simply because life deserved action, because a being in need deserved care. Outside, the snow had melted slightly under the weak light of the morning, revealing the frozen landscape dotted with tracks and shadows. The galaxy continued, unaware of this quiet miracle on a remote frontier world. But in that small room, a human and a dragon shared a bond that would ripple farther than either could imagine. Edrin carefully watched Kirix, who now blinked and turned his small head toward his mother. Vaelthra nuzzled him gently, letting out a soft rumble that vibrated through the walls. The hatchling twitched his wings again, testing strength he had not yet felt, and then let out a soft, joyful cry. Edrin allowed himself a small, tired smile. Hours of work had led to this moment. It was quiet, almost invisible, yet profoundly powerful. Vaelthra shifted her massive form closer to the hatchling and the human. Her eyes softened as she looked at Edrin. "I judged humans too quickly," she admitted in her low, melodic voice. "I believed your kind only destroyed. I believed your kind was reckless. But now, I see. Humans survive because they care when others cannot. Humans act when no one else will. You did not fight with weapons. You did not threaten. You chose life." Edrin shook his head lightly. "I don't know if I deserve that praise," he said quietly. "I just did what I could. Any being in need, any life, deserves a chance." Vaelthra's eyes glistened with emotion. She had carried heavy judgments for centuries, and yet here she felt them slowly dissolving. She had brought her hatchling to this human outpost, risking unknown dangers, because hope mattered more than fear. And now, seeing Kirix open his eyes, she knew the risk had been worth it. The hatchling moved slightly, curling toward the warmth of the blanket and his mother. His small eyes flickered toward Edrin again, as if acknowledging the hands that had saved him. Edrin reached out, letting the tiny dragon touch his finger with a trembling claw. The connection was small but real. It was trust, fragile and growing, a bond forged through patience, care, and quiet courage. Vaelthra lowered her head even further, almost resting her snout near Edrin's shoulder. In dragon culture, this gesture could mean many things. Respect, reverence, a promise, or a form of unspoken agreement. For Edrin it felt like something more. A recognition that what humans did mattered, that what he had done, without strength, without magic, without grand power, had changed lives. Outside, the light of dawn grew slowly. The snow reflected a soft, pale glow, the first day of the new year beginning in silence. Inside, time seemed to slow. Edrin looked at Kirix, then at Vaelthra, and finally at the quiet room itself. It was no longer just a small outpost clinic. It was a place of healing, a place where two very different species had met in need and trust. A place where judgment gave way to understanding, where fear gave way to hope. Vaelthra let out a low, warm rumble, a sound that vibrated softly against the walls. She had seen many things in her long life: battles, storms, victories, and losses. But she had never witnessed patience, courage, and care expressed like this. She realized that humans, though fragile and unpredictable, carried a strength no weapons could measure. The refusal to abandon the wounded, the determination to act when the world expected them to turn away. Edrin, tired and worn from the long night, felt the truth of her words. He had expected silence, isolation, and perhaps regret on this New Year's morning. Instead, he had life, trust, and the quiet recognition of something bigger than himself. Life was fragile, yes, but it was worth fighting for, and he had done just that. Kirix blinked again, weakly stretching his tiny wings. Vaelthra nuzzled him, then looked at Edrin one final time before gently stepping back. Her head remained bowed slightly, a gesture of respect that no human would ever forget. In that small room on the edge of the galaxy, a silent understanding passed between species. Life, care, and courage mattered above all. The first light of dawn spread across the frozen frontier, casting pale gold over the outpost. Edrin Hale sat by the small heater, tired but awake, listening to the soft, rhythmic breathing of Kirix. The hatchling had grown stronger over the night. His fever had finally passed, and his tiny wings twitched as if testing newfound strength. Vaelthra, the massive dragon mother, rested close by, her eyes calm and wise, watching over her child. The time had come for them to leave. Edrin had known it from the first moment she had knocked at his door. Dragons, even young ones, were creatures of freedom. Vaelthra could not stay forever in a human outpost, no matter how safe or warm it was. Her home lay across the mountains, in forests untouched by human wars, where the sky stretched wide and the air hummed with magic and life. Vaelthra leaned her head close to Kirix, nudging him gently. "Are you ready, little one?" she asked softly. The hatchling chirped in reply, his small eyes flicking toward Edrin as if to say goodbye. Edrin kneeled beside them, brushing a hand over Kirix's small head. "You'll be fine," he whispered. "Stay strong. Keep your mother safe. And remember, you survived because someone refused to give up on you. Remember that." Kirix twitched his tiny wings again, weak but determined. Edrin smiled, knowing the hatchling had understood in the way that dragons understood, not with words but with heart. Vaelthra shifted her massive body toward the door, then paused. Her eyes, deep and shining, met Edrin's. She dipped her head slowly, almost reverently. In dragon culture, this gesture was sacred. It was a silent promise, a bond that could not be broken easily. Edrin felt his chest tighten. He had seen many battles, many alliances, and many pacts, but none as profound as this simple, wordless moment. Before leaving, Vaelthra did something unexpected. She raised her massive claw, tracing a circle in the air above the clinic. A soft, faint light shimmered briefly, forming a symbol that hovered gently over the building. Edrin recognized it instantly, a mark of protection, one that would keep danger away, one that would warn travelers that here, in this small outpost, life was respected. He looked at it in awe. Dragons rarely left gifts for humans. Yet here, Vaelthra had left a symbol not of wealth or power, but of safety and trust. With one last nuzzle to Kirix and a final glance at Edrin, Vaelthra turned toward the open sky. The hatchling clung to her back as they spread their wings, lifting into the cold morning air. The snow sparkled under their ascent, and Edrin watched as they disappeared into the horizon, leaving silence and warmth behind. Days passed and the quiet of the outpost returned. Yet, Edrin noticed subtle changes. Travelers began appearing, some human, some not. A small group of alien traders arrived, injured by accidents in the frozen wilderness. A lone creature from a distant world, scales glimmering faintly, came seeking shelter after an illness. Each of them found care, first in simple words, then in steady hands, guided by experience and patience. Edrin had not expected visitors. He had expected silence. But now word had spread quietly. Here in the far reaches of the galaxy, a human healer could save life when all else failed. Edrin's outpost became more than a shelter. It became a place of healing and understanding. He treated creatures no one else would attempt, using skills honed in war but now applied with peace and patience. Every patient carried a story. Every injury or illness became an opportunity for hope. And slowly, Edrin realized something he had long forgotten. A life devoted to helping others was never truly quiet. Even when the war ended, even when the galaxy moved on, there was always work that mattered. One evening, as Edrin prepared a meal for a small, injured alien traveler, he looked up and saw a faint shimmer above the roof. It was Velthra's symbol of protection, still glowing softly, even after weeks. The knowledge that she and Kirix were safe filled him with quiet pride. He understood now that actions, even small, patient, careful actions, could ripple far beyond what anyone could see. One choice to help could inspire many others. Months passed. Travelers of all kinds came to his outpost. Some were wounded by accidents, some by old conflicts, and some by strange illnesses from worlds humans had never mapped. Each one left a story, and Edrin treated them as he had treated Kirix, with care, patience, and determination. Stories of the human medic who saved a dragon hatchling traveled quietly through space. Among dragons and other species, humans were no longer seen only as warriors or destroyers. They were also healers, keepers of life, and unlikely guardians of the weak. Edrin continued his work day after day quietly without seeking recognition. Yet, the galaxy began to notice, in subtle ways, the effects of human compassion. Ships would detour to this outpost for aid. Travelers would speak of a human who treated all life equally, who acted not for reward or glory, but because it was the right thing to do. Humans could create wars, yes. They could destroy. But they could also create something rarer. Healers who kept working long after the battles ended, who kept choosing life when the universe seemed cold or uncaring. On a quiet evening, as Edrin tended to another patient, a small sound caught his attention. Kirix had returned, alone at first but curious. He perched on the edge of the clinic, peeking in with bright, curious eyes. Edrin smiled and opened the door. Velthra appeared a moment later, gliding gracefully over the snow, her massive wings folding as she lowered herself beside her child. She did not stay long, dragons did not linger, but the gesture was enough. It was a quiet visit, a reminder that bonds created by care could last far beyond a single night. The outpost remained quiet and cold, but it was no longer lonely. Life arrived here, fragile and diverse, and Edrin had become its guardian. He had begun the new year alone, expecting silence. Now he realized that silence was not always empty. Sometimes it was full of potential, waiting for those willing to act. The galaxy spun on, unaware of the small miracles on this frozen frontier, yet those who experienced them carried the memory. Dragons and travelers spoke quietly of the human who saved a hatchling and continued to heal, who worked tirelessly, who reminded the galaxy that strength was not measured in weapons or firepower but in the courage to help others, to protect life, and to act when it mattered most. Edrin Hale, old war medic, looked out at the horizon as the stars began to appear. The winds blew cold and the snow sparkled under the first light of evening. But inside, in the warmth of the outpost, life thrived. He had learned something he had always known but had nearly forgotten. The greatest victories were not fought in battlefields but in hearts. And sometimes, a single choice to care could change the galaxy quietly, one life at a time. The dragon mother and her hatchling had returned to the wilds, leaving behind a legacy of trust, a symbol of protection, and a story that would travel quietly through dragon space. Edrin returned to his work, steady hands and calm mind, ready for the next life that might need saving. In the months and years to come, more travelers would arrive. Some would stay, some would leave, but all would carry with them a single truth. Humans could destroy, yes, but they could also save in ways no one expected.